to God, to ourselves, and our neighbors. We all have rules. Family rules, life rules, citizen rules. Brush your teeth. Do your homework. Call your mom. See your doctor twice a year. Go to church. Give 10%. That's the stewardship part of my sermon. I remember learning how to read and spell at a time when phonetics were the prescribed way of teaching. I got a lot more head recognition at 8 o'clock. This was before the whole word, whole language stuff that came out. The phonetic rules, about how letters sound and what letters go together. And we memorized those in little rhymes, those rules of phonetics. Vowels are A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y and W. When two vowels go walking, the first one does the, see? I before E, except after C, and when it sounds like the A, as in neighbor. These rules did help me learn to read, and I find that when I'm spelling, I still call upon them to make sure I have that I and the E in the right spot. But like most of English, there's always an exception to the rule. Commandments can seem a bit like that, rules that help me narrow my focus and can help me decide and decipher a path to take, a decision to make. And for our spiritual ancestors, the Israelites, those wandering Hebrews, it was not much different. After all, the first 5 books of the Bible are called the Torah, the law, and they show us the importance of rules. The rules, the Torah, these are commandments given by God. Commandments that help to define Israel as a faith community, as a people of God. Oh, there were a lot of rules in the Torah. It's mostly all rules. And actually, I guess scholars say 613 kind of qualify as commandments, along with a couple variations of the 10 commandments that we're most familiar with. And if you remember that first reading just a few minutes ago, this all gets boiled down in a couple of verses in Leviticus, where we heard today, you shall be as God created you, holy. Now that either sounds way too easy or way too hard. Because if I am holy and you are holy, so are all others holy. What about those with whom I disagree? Holy. What about those who frighten or scare me? Holy. What about those who come from other places? Holy. Are you catching on? Yeah. What about those who look different, act different, think differently? Holy. Believe differently? Holy. Everyone is holy in God's eyes. Everyone. Even if we don't agree. This is the truth of the commandment to love God with all your heart, with all your soul and mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. In applying this rule of life, our minds are blown. Our attitudes are adjusted. Our ability to listen increases. We are continually being converted. Jesu, Jesu, fill us with your love. Show us how to serve the neighbors we have from you. The psalmist said it. Happy are they who delight in the law. In other words, happy are they who honor God's holiness in ourselves and in others. This is Jesus' answer to the Pharisees in the gospel. Holiness is found in the law, that is, loving God and your neighbor. Loving ourselves and one another is holy behavior, befitting all holy ones. Now, in Luke's gospel, which is not the gospel we read today, I know we read Matthew's version of this little exchange between the Pharisees and Jesus, but in Luke's gospel, it's followed by Jesus' telling of the parable of the Good Samaritan, answering that persistent question, which we all have, just who is my neighbor? Or maybe it would be easier if we just said, who is holy? You see how quickly this gets more complicated and even unsettling for us when we consider the word holy as another word for neighbor? We find ourselves like the Pharisees trying to figure out a loophole, attempting to negotiate or navigate a way around God's love for us and all people. And our response to being loved is to try to limit God's designation of holy. We're looking for the exception. Not here, not this rule. Denying holiness in ourselves and in others is a sin. This is the real consequence of not following this reimagined commandment. The risk is separation from God, from our neighbors, and from ourselves. Who we see as our neighbor is directly connected to how we understand the commandment, this rule to love God, self, neighbor. Jesu, Jesu, fill us with your love, show us how to serve the neighbors we have in you. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with rules. I love rules when they support what I believe and what I value. I don't much care for them when they seem to challenge what I believe or value. I've been known to speed when in a hurry. I've been known not to use the crosswalk when it's inconvenient. Often, I do not shake before opening. You know how it says it on the thing? I also may, when desperate, eat yogurt beyond the expiration date. But more frequently than I'd like to admit, I disregard signs and rules that I do not think apply directly to me. I've also developed a full set of explanations and excuses for why I can and do break the rules. Dangerously, this also applies to who I deny as holy. I believe I share these tendencies with the rest of this room, with the rest of humankind. This is why we need to be reminded of our holiness and of our call to love over and over and over. Of course, we can disregard any commandment, any rule, but in this case, I think we do so at serious risk. When we lose sight of our call to love, when we forget that we are loved, beloved of God, then fear and self-protection and anger and despair overtake us. And holy becomes harder and harder and harder to see. In neglecting our relationship with God and others, we fall prey. We fall prey to creating God in our image rather than seeing we are created in God's image. Holy. Loving God and neighbor and self sets up a challenge in all times and in all places. Yet it is a guideline that solidly stands against the lethargy of the status quo and the cynicism of disease. It is, as it has been and will be forever, a needed and necessary refrain, a rule worth memorizing. Jesus, as one called beloved and sent out to heal and redeem, was always reminding the people who listened about this holy relationship between God and others and self and its power to change the world. In that same spirit of hope and healing, let us, as beloved of God, return to God the love God gives. With all our hearts, all our soul and mind, and loving our neighbors as ourselves. Jesu, Jesu, fill us with your love, show us how to serve the neighbors we have in you. Amen. Amen.